Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast. And with me today is a very special guest, and we are in for a treat. Today's guest is an ex-Mormon who grew up in an elite Freemason bloodline. And that's all I'll say for now, because I'm going to let Charissa take it away from here and fill us in. Charissa, welcome to the show. And if you wouldn't mind, give us a little bit of a background. You know, how do you find yourself into this world of crazy folks like I talking on podcasts?
Yeah. Well, so when I was young, my mom always talked about the Illuminati, and it was kind of a taboo topic for Mormons. And so it was kind of odd for her to talk about that a lot, but she was very interested in it in regards to the government and Hollywood and being Mormon, you know, uber religious. It was really interesting to have that going on because a lot of people within Mormonism don't talk about that kind of stuff. And I realized why down the road, because Mormonism essentially is one of the five branches of the Illuminati. And the Illuminati branches are the Freemasons, the Mormons, the Catholics, the Cabal, and the Satanists. And they all basically function together to run the human trafficking in the world because they all worship these false gods, and these gods require blood and children and incest. And it stems essentially from the Nephilim in the Bible. And in Mormonism, the Book of Mormon, the main prophet in Mormonism, his name is Nephi. And if you know, you look at the word Nephi and the word Nephilim, the first several letters of the word Nephilim is Nephi. And so I discovered just recently I'm kind of starting at the end because it makes the story easier to understand why, you know, I ended up where I did. But the Book of Mormon is essentially a channeled book from fallen angels, and going all the way back to the first incursion in the Bible when the Nephilim, or when the fallen angels came down against God's will and started creating children with women, human women, which was an illegal, you know, they broke God's law by doing that, which was why there ended up being the flood, because the human genome was defiled. And so you end up with all of these hybrid beings who were giants, and there wasn't, you know, enough food to feed them. So they started eating humans. And because they broke God's law, you know, and then they were in rebellion, then they become these rebellious spirits. And so not only are they eating humans just to satisfy their food needs, but they're participating in incest and ritual abuse. And the fallen angels were the ones who taught humanity all of the things that are against God's laws in the Bible, you know, like divination and all of the occultic teachings and all of the things that the occult arts and the Satanists participate in when it comes to blood ritual and all of those things. That knowledge all came from the fallen angels, which started in the Garden of Eden with Eve when she partook of the fruit from the serpent. And so that's where, you know, you get this serpent seed, you get the Nephilim, and the Mormons are actually a huge part of that. And Mormonism was actually created by Joseph Smith, who I believe I've been hearing more and more lately, and it's starting to be revealed to me and become more clearly who he really is. I've heard he's a descendant of, that he was a, what's their name? The Rothschild, that he was a Rothschild, that he was related to, somebody just emailed me this week and told me that he was adopted, that there's a whole book that him and his brother were actually adopted into a family, which is really common in the Illuminati bloodlines because they hide their elite children in other families to do certain jobs that they assign them to do. And so anyway, Joseph Smith has a long, dark, shady history that I heard about often as a child growing up as a Mormon, but I didn't really know or understand. I hadn't looked too deeply into it because when you're Mormon, especially, I come from pioneer heritage, which means going back several generations. You know, I had ancestry who came over to join the church with Joseph Smith. And so you don't really question, and so my mom had taught me all of these things about the world at large, about the Illuminati, in these different areas. But what I didn't understand is that that Mormonism, the reason she knew about this stuff and was interested in it and wanted to talk to me about it is because my family was actually a bloodline in the Illuminati, in the occult practices that hides, not necessarily, I don't, a lot of people say that the Mormon church was infiltrated. A lot of people say there's imposters. I say it's from its inception. It's a serpent religion. It's a Nephilim religion. And it's based on teachings from the fallen angels. And it does have truth in it because they've taken a lot of things that are out of the Bible and put them in the Book of Mormon. And a lot of people go, oh, I don't understand how you could ever be a part of that religion, But the interesting thing is I really do feel like Mormonism, compared to a lot of the Christian religions, has a massive amount of truth, and also some of the stuff that is truth that's in more New Age and occult stuff that's tainted and twisted. Mormons have some of that too, because it's run by Freemasons, and they have these other pieces of the puzzle as well that a lot of other Christians stay away from. But the Mormons kind of keep them hidden in the background. They don't, because in secret, the elite Mormons practice magic and satanic ritual. And so there's this whole other aspect that I was learning about myself, having no idea that it had anything to do with my own family, just understanding that I was starting to realize, going all the way up to the hierarchy of the Mormon church, which would be the prophets, the general authorities, the bishops, and the stake presidents that run the religion, they're required to be Freemasons in order to be called to those positions. Those are callings. And so my dad was a bishop. My brother was a bishop. My sister was always telling me that my brothers were Freemasons. And I didn't really know or believe her. I just thought that was a term she used, because in the Mormon temple, there's all of these different signs of Freemasonry that exist in the Mormon temple. And I had gone to the temple. There's a bunch of different ceremonies and rituals that you do in the Mormon temple. The first one that you do is you take out your own endowments, which is an initiatory. They call it initiatory, which is similar to a Freemason initiation. But Joseph Smith stole the rites of Freemasonry and their rituals and put them into the Mormon temple, which is why he ended up being murdered. They call him a martyr, but he was not. He was murdered by his Freemason brothers for stealing and religionizing their rituals and their ceremonies and making his own. So essentially what Mormonism is it's an elite branch of Freemasonry that kind of functions in its own right. There are some, Mormons that are in the Illuminati that also do, regular Freemasonry, but for the most part, they just use their temples and function on their own, but it's still Freemasonry. So on the Mormon garment, which a lot of people call, I don't know if you've ever heard of the magic underwear that Mormons wear, but when you go to the temple and do your initiatories, they wash and anoint you, and they give you a garment to wear. And these garments on the nipples have a compass and a square on them. So essentially in Mormonism, you're initiated into the rites of Freemasonry. And in the temple, you're taught exactness. And exactness is not biblical, because the biblical teaching of Christianity is mercy and grace, that Jesus Christ hung on the cross for you, right? And so that you're saved by grace. And in Mormonism, they teach you that you wear this garment every day to live in exactness, which is really to Antichrist. And so there's a lot of Christians don't realize Mormons claim that they're Christians, but it's actually Antichrist. If you know what the Bible teaches, Mormonism is an Antichrist religion, because it was started with intent to deceive by Freemasons. So I don't know if what your audience knows about Freemasonry, but one of the things that I talk about a lot in what I discovered, and I was sharing this with my brother and his friends, who I found out later are Freemasons and are involved in these types of rituals, is that the biggest kept secret of Freemasonry is that their mysticism and the illumination of the third eye happens through sodomy rituals. So they're sodomites. at not always at the lowest levels, but I don't know exactly which. I can't wait for one of the Freemasons to come out who's left and tell me what level it actually starts at. But if you're born into it generationally, it doesn't matter, because generationally they start sodomizing the children when they're babies to blow the third eye open. And that's one of the things that's tricky about, in New Age and occult topics and discussion of the third eye being opened. I went into kind of indigenous studies for a while and was doing, indigenous ceremonies and things like that when I left the Mormon church. And so I studied a lot about opening my third eye. I did a lot of different meditations to try to do it. I never was able to get there. I do have visionary gifts now and spiritual gifts of dreaming. I'm a dream interpreter and I do have visions. But the shortcut way in the occult and in Freemasonry is sodomy. And they start with their children. And so they do this to their babies when they're born. And so if this is a generational bloodline, then it doesn't matter, if you're initiated in as a man and you get invited in and you go through the levels on your own, then that might be a surprise later. They don't tell you that you're going to advance to the level where your next initiation is going to be a sodomy ritual. And so it made sense, because looking back when there was a lot of sexual abuse with the children. And among the children, there was a lot of sexual exploitation and sexualization. And so growing up when I was young, all the kids in the neighborhood were like being sexual with each other. Like there was a lot of children on children sexuality, which I assumed growing up that was normal and just experimental play. But come to find out, it's something that's done within these Mormon elite bloodlines, is they teach the children how to be sexual from infancy. And then a lot of them, with me, I was deemed expendable, and I'll go into more of that in a little bit. But so I wasn't taken to rituals and things like that and included in certain secrets that my family has because I was deemed expendable. And so that meant that I was sexualized up to maybe 6-ish. They know when you can start remembering, and they know that up to a certain age, usually your mind will split and block those memories out. But I just found myself as a child incredibly sexual and sexualized within the neighborhood, and thinking that I had figured those things out on my own. But I didn't know the origin of where those things came from. And so just kind of holding on to that, I'll come back to that. But what happened when I had moved back to Utah, I had gotten divorced, and I was living around my family again. I hadn't lived around my family for like 13 years. And my ex-husband told me that he was demanding that I live in Davis County, which is where I grew up. And come to find out later, that's because Mormon boundaries of their wards, they have certain, you have to go to a certain church in a certain neighborhood. It's done by boundaries. And so the wards are set up that there is 13 witchcraft coven families within every ward of Mormonism in the Illuminati, hidden in secret, that helps keep everybody in Mormonism under a spell, under mind control. And these witches covens, these elite bloodline families, make sure that happens. They report back if somebody's defecting, if somebody's learning too much or realizing what's going on, you get reported. And then they make sure that there's something that they set up to have an experience for you to be able to put back into mind control programming. And there's a lot of different things that they use within Mormonism. They use drugs, they use dentistry, they use magic. I can't take pharmaceuticals. I've always been extremely sensitive. So for me, there was a lot of witchcraft and magic done on me to keep my mind under a spell. So I wasn't able to recognize a lot of the things that happened around me that were going on growing up. Really what was happening is I wasn't putting 2 and 2 together. There was a lot of weird stuff going on, but you just kind of move on, and don't really process it. And so when I moved back to Utah, I had really started getting deep into, because I had left Mormonism shortly before I got divorced. I started getting out and just realizing there was other things spiritually that I wanted to do. And I didn't have like a bad taste in my mouth for it yet. And I was even still kind of an apologist for Joseph Smith when I first left. But as I started getting further away from it, I started really questioning, what is Freemasonry and why does everybody talk about, what this is part of a Mormonism? And I'd never even really considered, I wear these compass and squares on my nipples every day, like what does that mean? So I really got into studying what Freemasonry is. And I was talking to my brother about it a lot at the time, and my sister, and they both are involved in my family secrets. So they would play dumb, and act like they didn't know the things that I was learning already, but they did. But also, like my sister, for instance, I don't think my brother's so much DID. The men don't get us programmed. The men are like more conscious of what they're doing in Freemasonry, but a lot of the women are. Are you familiar with DID? Do you know what that is? Dissociative identity disorder?
Yeah.
Okay. So a lot of the women in Mormonism are going to have that disorder. So they may have like alters in their personality that are like a witch, or their child alter, or, their business person. And so they may not fully understand what they're doing and what's going on around them. And I started noticing this with my sister. It was very odd. And like I said, I still hadn't put two and two together. I was making observations, but I wasn't able to come to any conclusions of what it meant. And so I was studying all of these things, and I actually came to the conclusion that all the way up to the higher echelons of Mormonism, that they were involved in child satanic ritual, blood ritual, partaking of flesh, partaking like pedophilia. Just all of this was rampant in the highest echelons of the Mormon church. And I had started meeting a lot of people who were sexually abused when they were younger by their family members who were Freemasons. And so I really started understanding like the ugly secrets behind Freemasonry and Mormonism. And so I was planning to start a podcast, and I was going to start talking about these things and interviewing people, and not just those things. I plan on talking about music and a lot of other things. But my brother was aware, and he was, reporting back to my family, because that's what these Mormon elite bloodlines do. Is anything you ever do is like a group discussion. And so they were acting like they were supporting it. And even like when I first found out that Freemasonry was based in ritual sodomy, I told my brother this, and my brother like looked at me and he shook his head and he's like, "Wow, you're really good at figuring this stuff out." Like he already knew, like it didn't occur to me then that that's what he was telling me. He already knew, and he was frustrated that I was figuring out all their secrets. So he was just kind of like, there was a lot of those Freudian slip moments where the reaction of the conversations with my family came back to me in force. And so I was just starting to feel, when I got divorced, even though I was divorced and I was looking forward to this freedom, because I was just a young mother and my ex-husband was incredibly controlling, incredibly angry person, and not loving it all. It was a pretty miserable marriage. And so I was really looking forward to freedom, and just experiencing myself and finding loving people, because I hadn't experienced that. He'd taken me away from my family and all my friends for 13 years. And so I just really wanted to integrate back into like some fun and some love and some life. And so I found, the shamanic community, and I started studying shamanism. And so as I was going down that path, I started really realizing the oppression of the government in these indigenous circles and the control. And so I started studying, maritime law and land law and these different jurisdictions within the government. And so I had tried to move my jurisdiction from maritime into land. I had been doing a lot of studying of this judge whose name was Anna von Reitz. And she was an ex-judge who taught about how our judicial system is actually satanic, the entire judicial system. It's why they wear robes. It's why they kneel at the bar. They're worshiping a worshipful master. It's, why the same graduation thing that you wear with the tassel on it that, you move to the other side when you graduate, that's done in the Mormon temple. How weird is that? That in the Mormon temple, the men actually wear these hats that are kind of like a graduation cap, and they have a tassel on it, and they move it to the other side partway through the ceremony. That's done in high school graduations. That's these types of things, and the robes that they wear, these judges. It's all part of the same secret, occult, satanic system, which I now call the beast system. They're part of the beast. And so it's set up in every organization. And, she's talking about finances and freedoms and everything that's run by this beast system. So, supposedly what was going on was that you were going to be able to move your jurisdiction from maritime into land. And essentially, if the police pull you over, you could just tell them you don't have any jurisdiction over me. You have different plates. You have a different ID. And so I attempted to move forward with that. But I had also been studying sovereignty a little bit. And it hit me one day that I really just needed to declare sovereignty after I'd gone through this process. But my mom was on to me because I asked my mom and my sister to come to the bank with me to, you had to have a witness saying that you were who you were when I was going through the paperwork process of moving my jurisdiction from maritime into land. And my mom had come to the bank with me and knew what I was doing. And so they always knew what I was doing. And there was something weird going on there. And her behavior was very strange. And I look back now and I realized she was worried. Like, what is she going to do if she actually, gets set free? Because I didn't realize what was going on behind the scenes as my family was handling and controlling my whole life because I was learning too much. And they didn't want me exposing Mormonism for what it was because they're part of this bloodline, cult. And so I was about to start my podcast, and I was like literally days away from, I had a guy like designing my what do you call it? My logo and everything. And all of a sudden one night I was sitting in my office and I just felt like the land thing wasn't going to do it. And I had a friend who was kind of teaching me about how to, about these different jurisdictions, because it's really complicated because it's all done in legalese, And so once I figured out that really what I needed to do to feel free was to do sovereignty, and she had told me there was this whole paperwork process and you mail it into the government, and it was really weird because there was this whole thing that you were supposed to do. You like mail it to yourself, but it goes through the post office, and somehow when it comes back to you, then it. And I had written an energy healing method years before while I was still Mormon that was kind of taboo while I was Mormon. It was called Spirit Code, and I taught how to illuminate spiritual gifts, not through sodomy, through using the name of Jesus Christ. And so I understood in that creation and that writing experience, I got a lot of downloads through that and understanding of what it is to create something and these different spiritual gifts and abilities. And so I knew also through that writing process that, and through discovering how corrupt the government was, that why would I write sovereignty papers and submit them to the government, who are the Satanists running everything, and let them know that I was declaring myself sovereign? That was just going to put a big red flag, on me. And so I was like, I don't need to do that. And I also had an understanding that before everything is physical, everything is spiritual. Life is spiritual. And you have to look at things from a spiritual aspect before you can understand the physical aspect. And so I just was like, I'm just going to write the papers and do it myself and give them to God, do it with God. I don't need to do this through any government or mailing it to myself. So I got a black marker and I just scribbled out these papers of sovereignty. And also through this energy healing program that I had written, I had also learned a lot about what I didn't know about it then because I wasn't like a biblical Christian. I was Mormon, and they don't teach you about deliverance really in Mormonism. But I had learned about rebuking evil spirits. And I also am a generational healer, so I knew about breaking generational curses. And so in these papers of sovereignty, I essentially wrote and broke a whole bunch of generational curses. And because I declared sovereignty and denounced a bunch of generational curses, it cut me off, literally in the spiritual, from the jurisdiction that my family had over me, that the enemy had over me. in order to control and handle my entire life and to have these magic spells over my mind where I couldn't see and realize and recognize what was going on around me. So when that broke, I wake up the next day and literally it was crazy. My mind started pinging 1,000,000 miles a minute. Things my family had been doing and saying to me for years, putting it all together and realizing who they were. And that I'm living in this house that my brother had talked me into moving into, that he was coming over and like coming in my house and getting my mail when I was gone, just really weird stuff. My sister had been like saying random things to me that I had written in poetry that I had in my computer. She would like say a line from my poem, and I was like, well, that's weird. But I just thought it was psychic. Oh, she read my mind. I used to think about things like that. But then I realized, like, no, like they're not that gifted. Like they're into all my stuff. They're spying on me, you know? And so I found a book of my sister's that was like a whole bunch of magic spells that she was writing, and she was doing witchcraft and magic against me and my children. She had a handler herself that was like hanging out on the property who had broken her toe, which was why I let her move in with me and stay in my RV. And he showed up at my property that day that things broke, and there was just all this weird stuff going on, and I could feel it. It wasn't even just like I knew it. All of the sudden, like the spirit realm opened up to me, and all of this nasty, like pedophilia, bestiality, Freemason sodomy, all that stuff, like I could feel in my spirit. Like it shattered something. It shattered like this lamb's wool that was over me. And the numbness of feeling, actually by the grace of God, like we live with that. And this is, we live with a protective of not knowing. Which is why I believe, you know, in the Garden of Eden, when Eve was told, you don't want to partake of this fruit, you will surely die. Like, gnosis is really dangerous, actually, because when you get to a point of knowing so much, and the ones in the spirit realm that control this knowledge and information, who are the ones who have disseminated it, they're not happy. And you know, the unknowing of a lot of the ugly things that are happening in this world. It's one thing to know them. You know, there's a lot of people who are like truthers who are doing a podcast now who are talking about all of this stuff. And one of the things that really frightens me for them is like, what happens when you get to a point where you know too much and now you become a danger to yourself? Because the beast system finds out, you know, what you're doing. And a day's going to come where if you don't do what they say, if you don't obey martial law, if you don't get the jab, if you don't, you know, it's going to become so controlled that if you don't fall into line, that you're going to have a big scare and see some things and feel some things and know some things that you're not going to understand. And I also know that there's a time you know, we're going to see we got shapeshifters, we got hybrids, we got all these people on the earth who are remaining hidden, and it's going to start coming out. And there's going to be a lot of people who are going to freak out when they realize that this stuff isn't just something fun to talk about, but that it's real and that it's happening in our immediate environment with probably more people than you would ever realize that everybody knows personally in their own personal life. Like, for instance, in the Bible, it says the whole reason that God flooded the earth was because of the human genome had been defiled, because you had the hybrids who were half human, half angel. You have the hybrids who they started mixing animal seed with human seed, which is where you get all the Egyptian hieroglyphs, you know, where you have a part animal, part human, and all these statues in Egypt. And they were all the Egyptian stuff was black magic or white magic. And Egypt in the Bible was always being condemned because of all of these practices, you know, and people are pushing and raising these things up, but they're illegal access to these powers, illegal access to these abilities. And so when people realize really what's going on all around them, not just to a point of like, oh yeah, I know that, I believe that, but like seeing it for yourself, experiencing it for yourself, feeling it, having it become so normal, like that people are just like out in the public doing these horrific things, it's going to traumatize people, you know, it's going to be incredibly traumatizing. And that's what I went through, was the trauma of the reality of all of that showing up in my face. Literally, it was like, God was like, okay, well, so you want to be sovereign. And so you want to break your family's generational curses. And I'm going to show you who they are then. And I'm not only going to show you who they are, I'm going to show you all their affiliations. And it was like I went on a week's journey when I left my house that day with my kids of that veil being pulled back. And I turned off my phone. I had no idea where I was going. And it was like I was being led by spirit to all of these random locations where there was just abominations on the earth playing out and happening. And I could feel it. And so I went to stay at a hotel. I heard pedophilia happening upstairs. That was traumatizing. My brother was following me. He was on my tail. I saw him enter the hotel room across the hallway with his family with coats and masks on in the middle of the night. I could hear and feel satanic rituals happening in that hotel. We tried to go hike one night up to these hot springs that were my favorite hot springs. It was so weird. There was these penis stamps all the way up the mountain. Like it was like, those walking sticks. It was like somebody took a walking stick and made like a big mold of a cock and balls on the staff. And the whole way up the mountain, it was just
like a
cock
footprint.
And balls. Yeah.
Wow.
The whole way up. And I kept feeling like, do they know that I'm going up here? And are they having like a sodomy ritual at the hot springs tonight? And they're letting me, like, it was so weird. But I was, because this veil had been removed, I was receiving all of these downloads and just information, and we got halfway up the mountain and my daughter was like, we got to turn around. There was this really icy spot. And I didn't buy enough of the things that you put on your shoe when you have to walk on ice. And they were scared. So we just turned around and went back. And I slept in my truck for a week. I couldn't stay at a hotel anymore after I heard like pedophilia. They were talking about ordering a pizza. I heard this guy, I heard a child choking, and the guy said, well, if you learn to take it like a good girl. I mean, the floor was so thin. And this place was run by FLDS, which is the, what is that word? Fundamentalist Mormons. I forget what that F stands for. It's the thing about Joseph Smith and the Mormon religion is Joseph Smith didn't start just Mormonism. Joseph Smith started a whole bunch of religions. I think they're up to like 200 different branches now. A lot of people who leave Mormonism go and start their own religion. So you've got the fundamentalist Mormons, you've got the mainstream Mormon, which has over like 16 million members right now. And then you've got the RLDS, which I think is back in Missouri, and they have their own church, and they're all weird
right.
stuff going on,
Right. And it is, I just looked it up. It's the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So yeah, absolutely right. And yeah, it's startling, especially when you go far enough back and you realize at one point in American history, the Mormons tried to start their own colony called Deseret, and it stretched all the way from Canada to Mexico. I mean, this was a huge swath of land. And there's still tons of Mormons in Mexico, and I imagine the rule breaking or the rules are a lot more lenient down there than they are here. But wow, that is some really disturbing stuff. It seems like the modicum of control really rests in traumatizing the children of the Mormon church, and as you said earlier, creating these altars in women, bringing these men into this sort of patriarchal control structure where, they're now kind of imbued with this abusive archetype, this, I would call it like, a negative archetype of the fatherly role. It's like an inversion of what the father, the grandfather, the patriarch of a community is supposed to do. It's just really, really disturbing. Now, when it comes to Joseph Smith, there's a lot of interesting like aspects to his story, finding so-called golden tablets in mounds, and there's been a lot of research coming out and dozens of books about how we found all these giant skeletons in these mounds. We know what those might be, Nephilim, and then the subsequent cover-up, which only brings more questions, because if this was something that they just outright acknowledged, well, maybe that would indicate that there isn't something being hidden. But the fact that they've thrown all these skeletons away and hid them in basements somewhere, it's like, well, why can't we know the truth about this? And maybe it's because these entities are still very much active and in play today and are manipulating systems of society, such as these churches. And wow,
they absolutely are still in play, and that's what the big exposure that I want to put out about Mormonism is what it really is, because it is a Nephilim religion, and it is run by a lot of hybrid Nephilim, and they do have access to secret information. The Mormon Church has an entire vault, a secret vault. You have to be, you have to get permission or be an elite or a somebody or a bloodline relation to Joseph Smith. And so all of the information that's in there, and it's really tricky, and it's sad and it's hard, because a lot of people that leave Mormonism, they spend years going through the Mormon doctrines and trying to sort through it all and figure out what the truth is, and I don't play with that. And the reason is because from the early days, there's been so much tainting and what's the word? Where they go back and change something after it was written. What's that called? When
like a retcon? That's the phrase that's been coming to mind recently, but there's probably a better term for it. But yeah, I understand what you're saying, like rewriting history.
Yeah, they have found that there's been journals that have literally been changed. The stories changed, the true stories that are hidden in there. Some of the people who've had access to those vaults have come out and told the truth, and then they end up in prison or dead. So it's really hard to try to figure out, well, what's true. It's like a lot of people who still want to be Christian and leave, they're the ones who really hold on to this. And it's so tantalizing, the information, and because it does include mysticism and occultism shrouded as Mormonism, as Christianity, it's really addictive. Like Mormonism is addictive in a really weird way. And so it's really hard for people to leave. And then not only that, you have your 13 coven families who are doing magic spells and witchcraft over you in order to keep you under these illusions and unaware. And so breaking those curses has to be done spiritually. And so a lot of people leave and they can't get out from under the lamb's wool. In Freemasonry, there's a curse of blindness, of that tying of the blindfold over the eyes in the ceremonies, where seeing real and full and whole truth without like the yin and yang truth, without the light and the dark, that's essentially the Freemason floor, that's the black and white checkers, that intermingling of truth and lie. They say light and dark, but it's really just truth and lie. Like in the Mormon temple, Lucifer talks about teaching precepts of men mingled with scripture, which is lies of men mixed with biblical truth and creator's laws. And so it's very confusing and confuses the mind. And then you're trying to figure this all out, which is gnosis, which is the forbidden fruit that Eve was not supposed to partake of. So I went through years of reading so many books, and it's so mental. It's so mental, a lot of this information. And I had to leave the mental behind and go to the spiritual. So I had to reconnect with God and just be able to only hear that voice, because trying to sort through all of this stuff, and then all the lies and all the confusion, and then the Mormon spinning of truth. And the reason that they do that is because they're on an intentional mass deceit, because I believe that the Mormon Church is set up to hand their followers over to the Antichrist, and that they are intentionally participating in this as part of the New World Order.
And let's get into some of the more esoteric aspects of Mormonism, because from what I've learned over the past few years, going into New England history and the whole, esoteric mysticism that was going on, a lot of people take for granted, that it wasn't just Puritans here in the early days of the United States. There were tons of people practicing religions and things that got banned from Europe. That's why they came here. There was this sense of religious freedom, and a lot of cults and sorcerers and probably dark forces took advantage of that. And it seems like the Mormons have, as you kind of hinted at earlier, like a veil of Christianity. Mm-hmm. Christians find themselves sort of wrapped up in this, labyrinth of Mormonism, thinking that they're doing something that is ordained by God. But one of the things that I've heard, I wonder if you can expand on this, is that certain groups of Mormons believe that after they pass away, they will become somewhat like a leader or powerful ruler of some planet elsewhere. That sounds a lot to me like what the Nephilim call themselves, like the principalities of the different parts of the earth, right? And we have tons of examples of tribal cultures around the world who interact with these spiritual entities and say, oh yeah, they're not all good. You know, if we don't give them sacrifice, they cause a lot of trouble for us. So clearly, you know, it's not just the Mormons that interact with these beings, but it seems like they're in cahoots with these beings more than any other group.
It's exactly right. And what you said is interesting too, because that is exactly what I believe happened, was that Joseph Smith and his family, they were from the UK, and they did come over, and I believe that they were sorcerers and witches, and they came to hide what they were doing. You know, Joseph got into a lot of trouble doing gold digging, and he was accused of being into magic and sorcery, but a lot of people deny that and say that that wasn't the case. But he definitely was. And then a lot of his revelations and visions got changed down the road. And who knows how much of that stuff is even came out of his mouth, or it came out of Brigham Young's mouth, because, and I'm sorry, I got to go back. It wasn't Joseph Smith who they said was a Rothschild. It was Brigham Young. And Joseph being killed by his Freemason brothers, Brigham Young really wanted to take over the church because it's an elitist religion. And it's very clear, because even so there's 12 general authorities, and then there's 3 at the top of the church. You've got the prophet, and then the first counselor and the second counselor. And they say that this is set up just like God's kingdom, because the prophet is like God, and then you've got the Holy Spirit and Jesus Christ. So they mimic it like a Trinity. And then they have the 12 apostles, which were, you know, the ones who were in biblically with Joseph. So that's one of the things why they teach, it's the only true religion, because we have the true pattern of God's kingdom. And so Joseph, I just had to correct that with Brigham Young, but Joseph Smith, I believe he came over here, whether it was him or his family, that they were sorcerers, and that they were intentional deceivers, and that they were working with Freemasons to deceive, and that he saw an opportunity to set up a church and gain power. And I actually have a show on my channel from a guy who had a near-death experience, who saw Joseph Smith in hell. And it's really interesting, because I go through and treat it like a dream interpretation, because dream interpretation isn't just about dreams. It's a gift of reading symbols. And so I was reading all the symbols that he saw in his dream, and we break down what he saw there. And so that's fascinating. But so Joseph Smith, what we talk about in that interview is that the reason that he's in hell is because he wanted to be seen, known, powerful, have a following, you know, God, to be like God. The whole reason that Lucifer was thrown out of heaven is because he wanted to take over God's throne. And he was the first fallen angel. And then he led these other 200 angels away, which were the fallen angels who came down to the earth and slept with women and created the first incursion of Nephilim. So this is where all of the fallen information, all of the gnosis, all of the occultic teachings that are practiced are brought from this forbidden knowledge from these fallen angels. And it wasn't just Lucifer in the Garden of Eden. It was 200 other angels. And I believe it's still going on today, because like it says in the Bible that there were giants in those days and after. And then it says that as it would be in the days of the coming of the Son of Man, that it would be as it was in the days of Noah, meaning that the human genome would once be defiled again. And if God flooded the entire earth and only left 8 people, Noah's family, left to live because they had a pure seed, that most of the earth was going to have defiled genome, which is the Nephilim hybrid bloodlines, which is where you end up with these shape-shifting serpents and these super psychic, super occultic, incestuous bloodlines, like the ones who run the Mormon church, who are participating in all this nasty crap, you know? And so, you know, it's interesting because the Nephilim in the Mormon church that run everything, they're those elite bloodlines. And they claim that they're direct descendants of Jesus Christ. but actually they're all direct descendants of Joseph Smith, and they're obsessed with bloodlines, which is why the Mormon Church is obsessed with what's it called, uh, family history and genealogy, and because they're looking for markers on the bloodline. And so then what was the other thing you were talking about? You were talking about
The
people who
ruling
came
in
over.
so in the early colonial days of the United States, there were tons of different occult groups that flourished here. Dozens of secret societies formed or came over from Europe and prospered here. But I feel like you did answer that. But there was another aspect to Joseph Smith's story that fascinated me, which is his interaction with the mounds, and then furthermore, this idea that when you're Mormon, you go on to, have this special place in the afterlife. And I wonder if this is a part of this like Nephilim trick, like, oh, hey, become like us, we're rulers in the afterlife. Meanwhile, they don't tell you they're like trapped in this purgatory realm of suffering. And that's part of why they're tormenting us is there's jealousy and hatred in where they're trapped.
Exactly. And it says in the book of Enoch that they are the disembodied evil spirits, are those Nephilim that died, that were drowned in the flood, and that they were left here to torment man. And probably because God wanted us to know, like, don't mess with this. They're going to torment you and help you understand. Like, that's one of the ways God allows us to understand the straight and narrow path, is to understand the broad path and to be tormented by. Because that's what happened to me when I left my family and went on this journey to get away from them. The torment that I went through is what set me straight and put me on a path of like, oh, I've got to live by God's law, which I was, there's natural law too, which is do no harm, and so there's a lot of people that don't want anything to do with Jesus because Christianity's been so tainted and live by natural law. And it says in the Bible, I have other sheep of my fold that I still need to gather that are not of this fold, meaning they haven't been grafted into Israel or adopted in. They're not following Jesus Christ, but they're living natural law. And it's really interesting because there's this guy, and his name is, it's Gabriel. I forget his last name. I'll have to look it up, but he's from one of the African countries. He doesn't speak very good English. His first language is Portuguese. And I have been learning a lot about the fallen angels and the Nephilim, because the fallen angels still appear to man. And he was born as a prince in his family's elite bloodline in another country. And a lot of these African occult witch bloodlines that come out of here that are sharing their testimonies of finding Jesus and coming to the truth, that they are, leaving these evil practices behind where they've been murdering, essentially. They're all set up as murderers when they do this witchcraft. And he was born as a prince into this bloodline. And from his birth, he was raised by fallen angels. They took him to a farm and he was literally raised by them, and they taught him all of their ways. And he said when he would get to a certain level of knowledge and understanding, then they would tell him a higher truth, which would undo a lower lie, which means they essentially intentionally lie at a certain level and tell you, like he said, one thing that they told me is that we're going to take over God's throne and we're actually going to be successful and we're all going to like have our own kingdom, that there was this other kingdom outside of Creator's kingdom that they were trying to establish, which was why when Lucifer was kicked out, he took these other angels, like, we got to start our own kingdom now. And so that was one of the lies he says that they told him, was that they were trying to establish this other kingdom and that they were going to be successful and that they weren't going to die. And that's one of the lies of Freemasonry too, is immortality. Like, we're not going to die. And the Bible actually says God didn't intend for us to die. So there is a truth of immortality, but not in sin. Like, if you're breaking everybody else's free will and doing abominations, no, you don't get immortality. And that's, where they twist this truth and taint it. And it's like, oh, we're going to live, but we can kill all these people and we can, have incest and molest these children and do blood rituals and eat flesh and human flesh and all of these things. And we're going to live and take over and have our own kingdom. And he believed that for a time. And then he said when he advanced to another level, what his training angels taught him, and he saw Lucifer himself a few different times at different, like when he was 5, and I can't remember the different ages that he actually saw him. And he said he looked very different than all the other angels because he had 6 wings and he was incredibly more beautiful than the other angels. And that's another one of the tricks. They can appear in so many different forms. You know, a lot of people, when you go into different psychedelic ceremonies and when you have your third eye open one way or another and you think you're receiving these visitations, you don't know if that's a light or a dark being. That's why the Bible's so important to understand, because it teaches you to test the spirits. We're not supposed to call on angels. It says, seek ye first the kingdom of God and all things will be added unto you. Like I used to kind of want and desire those things. I don't desire any of that anymore. And if God wants to send me an angel, then I'm going to ask it. Do you serve Jesus Christ or do you serve the kingdom of darkness? Because there's only 2 masters in the spiritual realm and you got to serve one or the other. And they can appear in different forms. And so this being of light, the way he described it, is like so beautiful. You know, a lot of people that I've listened to talk about how beautiful Lucifer is. And he's the light bearer. He does have light. And he talks about how God, when he gives these angels these gifts, God doesn't take those gifts from them. That's where there's the final judgment and they will eventually be destroyed. But at this one level, he believed that they were going to all be immortal and that they would live. Then finally he gets to the next level and these fallen angels start telling him, actually, we're all going to die and we're going to all be destroyed. And they know that God's going to destroy them. And the guy asked him, well, why do they want you to believe that? You know? And it's like, well, at one level, they want you to feel invincible. And so that you'll do anything for them. Then they get to another level and now you're evil enough and you've done so much murder and whatever that they're willing to tell you now, oh, and by the way, yeah, we're all dying, but we got to kill everyone off with us, you know? And so there is a deceit, an intentional deceit, and it's really hard to tell the difference because there are angels of light that serve God and there are the fallen angels that serve Lucifer's kingdom. And unless you really know what you're looking for, they can offer you the world, you know, and it can be really tantalizing. And so yes, Mormons do believe that they will become gods in the next life. And while that was something, the thing that's interesting about Mormonism is because they have a modern prophet, they believe in modern revelation, which means that they can receive continued revelation, which is essentially just their way of saying we can change our doctrine to suit our needs whatever day of the week we need to. And so a lot of these things that a lot of people talk about right now that Mormons believe, like Kolob and these planets, and there's this really old like cartoon from like the 60s or 70s or 80s that a lot of people have watched. Like a lot of that stuff wasn't talked about or taught while I was growing up in Mormonism. And I'm 44. So, you know, this stuff, like you hardly heard about it. There is a song that we would sing in sacrament meeting called If You Could Hie to Kolob. So they do believe in a planet called Kolob. It's not something they teach that often in their like meetings and stuff, but behind the scenes, and the thing is a lot of Mormons don't even know what they believe and what the original foundational doctrines that started Mormonism, a lot of them don't even understand it. If you ask them, they would like deny it. You know, they'd be like, oh, we don't believe in that. But so yes, there is that teaching, but I'm just saying it's not something that's talked about like frequently, like not something you're seeking, like, oh, right. I'm gonna, what they're really telling you that you're seeking is eternal life, and that there's 3 different kingdoms on the other side: the celestial, the terrestrial, and the telestial. And the telestial is the lowest, terrestrial's the middle, celestial's the highest, and that you want to attain the highest kingdom, and that if you don't go to the Mormon temple, that you can't attain the celestial kingdom. Sure, you can be saved and you can be in the terrestrial or the telestial, but telestial is more like the, you know, this lowest, not so much hell per se, but just it's really weird.
It's like a spiritual class hierarchy where you can be a good boy or a good girl and get to the best place at the table in the afterlife. And I mean, a lot of religions function with this dogma, unfortunately, but I think despite that, of course, people will say, well, there's a kernel of truth in all of this, and the Mormons still believe in the creator from the Bible, right? And so there is that aspect to it. But, you know, when we talk about the Mormons as a group, it seems like their actions prove otherwise, that, they're not really following God's way because, I don't know. I'm sure you've had a very hard experience, and I don't know how familiar you are with this woman. I forget her name at the moment, but her podcast was called like Mormon and the Meth Head, and she was on Sam Tripoli's podcast a while ago. And her story had to do with leaving the Mormon church, unfortunately falling into drug addiction, and that felt, at least from what I listened to in her story, it felt like it was almost encouraged. Like her family was like, well, you're not a part of us anymore, so screw off. We don't care that you're a drug addict. And I wonder, how that manipulation works to keep people in this control. Because, out there in Utah and whatnot, it could be pretty remote too. I mean, you're not exactly like, on the East Coast where you could just pop over to another state or another town. You're kind of isolated out there, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And you're raised in such an isolated way and with such a familiarity of your tight knit, like when you're Mormon, it's really awkward to like be with people who aren't Mormon because it is such a weird religion and there is such an elite standard and a religious spirit behind it, that it's awkward. And so it's really hard to leave. And especially if you're from a bloodline family, and it's part of it's cultural and intentional. And part of if you're from a bloodline family, and part of it is just learned behavior, for the people who are less assuming and aren't part of these bloodlines and just innocent like victims within Mormonism. And so like with me, with what you're talking about, I can relate to that on a level because what I didn't get to with my story is that I was actually in an arranged marriage unknowingly. And so one of my brother's friends growing up, who was in his brotherhood, was coaxed into marrying me. And this was planned for, I don't know how long before, because there had been signs of, I can look back and see now, like, because they do manipulative suggestions in order to get you to, because in Mormonism, the whole plan of salvation is that free will, and the whole reason Satan and Jesus fought in the pre-existence was that we would have free will and we could come down and choose. And so they want to make it look like they're honoring your free will and that you choose everything when really they're handling and plotting your entire life. And so when me and my ex-husband got divorced, they know that the whole reason I was deemed expendable is because they can see into your soul and they know, oh, she's going to be loyal to Jesus. She's not going to be able to serve Satan in our kingdom. She's not going to do these things. She's not going to go along with it. She'll fight us. These are the things that their witches and divinators, they can read your stars in your spirit when you're a baby. And so they're leery of me my whole life, watching me like, when's she going to defect? When's she going to wake up? When's she's going to realize what we're really up to? And so they have all of these precautions along the way to make sure that doesn't happen, so then they marry me to a handler who will make sure he keeps an eye on me and bully me and treat me like crap on purpose, because the lower they can keep your vibration and the more oppressed they make you feel, the less you're going to awaken and realize what's going on around you. And so his job was essentially be an asshole to me all of the time, and looking back, I can see it. He never loved me. He was in it for the agreement, and then when you get divorced, then it's like, and I think he'd been wanting and doing sorcery around, like trying to get me to leave for a while, because it has to seem like I chose it. Right. So he can't just say, I want a divorce, because how fun is it for a Satanist in a brotherhood who has somebody breathing down his neck all the time that actually loves God, that actually wants to follow Jesus Christ, that actually believes in the Bible, when you're in it all just as a cover story? I can't imagine how much he hated being married to me, And so I look back and I can see he was trying to like find a way out through different means and methods manipulatively. So anyways, when I ended up leaving and he wanted to set me up to he was always finding a way to get me, to get my kids from me. He used to tell me all the time, I'm going to have full custody of the kids. You're not going to get full custody of the kids. And even down to like, I ended up cheating on my husband at the end, because I ended up getting, this is a really long, weird story that I won't take the time to go into today. I talk about it in a lot of my other podcasts on my channel, if people are interested in hearing that. But I ended up being recruited into this like polyamorous side shoot cult off of Mormonism, that they were still pretending to be Mormons, practicing Mormons. A lot of them were still going to the Mormon temple, but they were preaching polygamy again, but polyamory. And the teacher's whole thing was that the reason Joseph Smith wasn't successful with polygamy was because it was one-sided, and God's no respecter of persons. So if it's not, the female doesn't have the equal opportunity to take multiple husbands as well, then, you know, and it's spiritual husbandry, and it's ugly and it doesn't work. I went into that experience for a reason, because I was supposed to learn like why Mormonism was so messed up from the beginning and why polygamy was never a good thing and still isn't. And so I was recruited into that weird thing. And then I think it was so shaming when it actually happened to my ex-husband. Like, he was pissed, and then he was just like angry with me. And then he was trying to set me up to get my kids. And so what they did is, within the Illuminati, there's a whole branch of it that a lot of people don't talk about, that I haven't heard a lot of other people talk about, that I figured out on my own, of Wiccan society. And the Wiccan indigenous society within the Illuminati are witches who go into these healing ceremonies to set you up to seem like they're setting up a healing indigenous ceremony, sound healing, a plant medicine ceremony, you know, and essentially what they're doing is they're there to mess with you, and they call demons in, they call the fallen in, they torment you, and then they go, oh, you're throwing up for, you know, you're purging your darkness. Really, you're being tormented. And so my family, I learned down the road that they were connected to a lot of these people who showed up after I left the Mormon church and were recruiting me into these groups, trying to get me to come to different ceremonies, because they wanted to try to set me up into something illegal so that he could end up taking my kids away and have something to use in court, but pretending like he didn't know anything. And I didn't ever talk to him, but I had friends that were reporting back to him always where I was. And that stuff started playing out and becoming evident of how I was being handled behind the scenes. And that I had friends who were not my friends, who were actually helping this all take place. And this happened across, like, we lived in New York City, here in California where we lived, Utah, and they have anywhere that he lived, all you have to do is go find your brotherhood. Within the Mormon church, they're all the brotherhood. And so if he moves into whatever ward, you've got your 12 Coven families right there who are going to support you no matter what, and help you and back you up no matter what. So you have a support system. And then where I live in California, there's also a really large society of witchcraft, Freemasonry, the Iranian Brotherhood, is that what it's called? I think it's, I forget. There's a name of it. It's the 14th hidden bloodline, Muslim. The 14th hidden bloodline, you know how there's the 13 main bloodlines of the Illuminati? There's a 14th hidden, which is Muslim. Well, come to find out, my ex-husband, he's actually half Iranian, and he supposedly didn't know. And his mom had some random secret, like 5-time fling in the middle of a separation with her husband, that she ended up conceiving him. And I think it's all a bunch of lies. There's something really shady that happened there. And so for all I know, he could be Muslim Nephilim, you know, like he doesn't talk. He's a mute, basically. He doesn't communicate with me. He's very cold. And looking back, I realized I think he's very psychic, but he doesn't tell you. But there were little things he said here and there, like he was reading me. And so, you know, with what you were saying about this woman, like I just can totally relate, because they flush you down the toilet if you're done and you walk away, then essentially they're trying to set you up, because especially if they're a Satanist bloodline, if they're a Nephilim bloodline, if they're Freemasons and they understand this information and knowledge to the level that most of them do understand it, they want you to open doors, demonic doors. And so that's why they would like encourage you to do drugs, because then you're more programmable. Then the witchcraft takes, like when I went and showed up at my sister's house, when I went back to pick up my RV after I left for a week and I got back there, the first thing she did, she brought me out weed and mushrooms and tried to get me to use it right then. And I knew that what she was trying to do, because she's a witch and she can astral project, she was trying to get me to use those to open up the spiritual realm so she could get in to influence me, because they know how to use plant medicine for their witchcraft and sorcery. And so I had quit everything and was using nothing. And I was like, no, take it back. I, don't want this. And I could tell she was bugged that I wouldn't. And so, getting you into drugs, getting you into even plant medicine and indigenous stuff and sound healing, like sound, they can carry curses and spells through sound. One of the things that I've learned through African witchcraft is that one of the reasons that they use different types of sound is because God travels through sound. And in the Bible, it says, and the word was with God. Before anything was even created, the word, everything came into creation through the word. And that's why the whole music industry is run by the Illuminati Satanists, because that's how they can have such a great influence on people, is because they open doors, portals through spoken word, song word, vibrational word. And so within the Wiccan communities and the indigenous communities, there's these sound healing ceremonies now that are really big. And you think how damaging could that be? Well, I took my children to a sound healing ceremony with me one time. And there was this one guy now that I realize is totally a deceiver. He's a sorcerer. And he was singing a song in another language. I don't know what it was. Looking back now, it was probably a demonic tongue. And he was always very sought after and wanted to come to these ceremonies. And they would play these instruments. And my children are very spiritually gifted. And my daughter, when she was there, he was singing, and she was getting very like sandpaper by it. It was like sandpaper on her soul, and she was very put off by it. She was like, Mom, what is he singing? I was like, it sounds beautiful, but it was off-putting to her. And I said, I don't know. And she goes, do you even know what those words mean? Do you even like she was speaking to my spirit of like, do you even know what he's saying? Because it doesn't feel good, And then later, when we were laying down and they were just doing the sound stuff, she got a stomach ache and she felt very sick and she started crying and she wanted to leave. And so there's a lot of these, dark powers within these communities. And so the Mormon community in Utah, and then there's Southern Utah, which is where all the hippies and the yogis go. So that's where a lot of the Mormons, when they leave, they end up going and joining these yogi and Wiccan New Age type communities. And then they're led into magic. Okay, so mainstream Christians, mainstream Mormons, bloodline Mormons who are living this cover life on the front, who are actually practicing sorcery and magic to control other people's lives and steal their will, their stars, their destiny, to keep them under satanic and demonic oppression. They know that a few rungs down from them is white magic, is light witchcraft, is like a lot of this new age stuff. And that stuff all eventually leads into what they're participating in and practicing in. And so they recruit into these groups on purpose to keep people within that beast system. And so they love to send people off one way or the other, whether it's to street drugs, whether it's to Wiccan communities, whether it's to witchcraft, whether it's even energy healing. Like when I was in Mormonism and that energy healing method that I wrote, I went to all of these energy healing conferences that were put on by this Mormon woman. And I look back and I realized, connected to my family's bloodline and a lot of the people that ended up doing a lot of that stuff, they were Mormon bloodline Illuminati families. And it's a way, if they can normalize that, they can do a little bit of their stuff in the public eye without having to keep it all so hidden, in the dark of the night or in their secret rituals. And so anyway, that's that. But I don't know if you want me to tell any more of my other part of the story of kind of what happened after wherever I left off.
Yeah, I didn't realize I interrupted. I'd love for you to continue your story.
Oh no, we just got on a tangent. You didn't
yeah, I did have another question. If that could work, I don't want you to lose your place in the story because I do want you to continue, but I'm sure you'll remember. When it comes to God's gifts, I'm under the impression that there are mystical things that can happen within God's will. And, I think a lot of people might have trouble sort of integrating that concept when we hear so much about the evils of mysticism and occultism, right? So what about that aspect can we speak to? Because I feel like in order to escape Satan's kingdom, in order to get away from that, you need to call on God for help, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a really good question. And that's something that I spent a lot of years sorting out and experiencing things personally to try to figure out. Because I, for years, was teaching spiritual gifts. And then it was like, I hadn't read the Bible much. And then when I go into the Bible and it starts talking about how divination's not okay, and I had been seeing channelers and psychics and stuff. And I actually got some really true prophecies, really, really powerful prophecies through channels and psychics and things like that. And I had gifts myself. And so trying to figure out what's the difference, because there are spiritual gifts, but from different spirits. And so essentially what it comes down to, and that's the reason I love just staying in the Bible now. I read so many different books over the years, and the Bible makes things so much clearer. And there's so much more power in the Bible through truth and knowledge and wisdom that can come when you understand that, to be able to discern the difference of exactly what you're talking about. Because essentially what it is there's a counterfeit of everything. And a lot of it's the language that we use, and the spirit behind it. And so you talk about like a psychic or somebody who has a gift to hear the Holy Spirit. The difference is a psychic is going to be receiving money, being paid for that knowledge and information. What they're hearing from is going to be a familiar spirit, which is forbidden. We're not supposed to talk to the dead or familiar spirits in the Bible. It doesn't come through Holy Spirit. In the Bible, the only spirit we're supposed to hear from is the Holy Spirit. These fallen angels love to mimic the Holy Spirit, which is where you get the Kundalini. Kundalini is false Holy Spirit, which is why you see people in Christian churches that are falling out and having these fits and everything, which is a Kundalini spirit. Looks very the same if you go into a Kundalini yoga session and watch what's happening with them. And that's that serpent that goes up the spine, which is the serpent is always the counterfeit, the one that showed up in the garden. And so Gnosis, the knowledge from the serpent, the Kundalini, and the fallen angels, that's going to be always on the counterfeit side. Now, when you come to God's kingdom, you can have something that looks very similar. But in God's kingdom, you don't pay for your spiritual gifts. You're not going to get charged for knowledge and wisdom and information, because then there's a motivation behind it to hear from these spirits, which almost always leads to deceit. And channeling is very similar to, I every morning I wake up, and almost every morning I'll have either a dream, and then while I'm writing my dream, then I'll start to doze up back to sleep. And a lot of people would call it like lucid dreaming, and that their third eye's open. I don't like to talk about third eye being open after what I learned about the sodomy rituals, and they shatter. What happens, and I'm going to just be graphic if that's okay, because I think it's important to understand this, is when a sodomy ritual happens, especially on an infant or a child, and they go up and hit the base of the spine, that Kundalini energy where those serpents crawl up the spine, it goes up and it shatters the pineal gland open through trauma. And now this child's pineal gland is open, and now they can have visions and start receiving gifts and hearing from the dark angels, which, like this man that I told you, he was raised by these fallen angels. And I say dark, but they don't look dark. They look light, And so when you shatter the pineal gland open through Kundalini energy, through sodomy ritual, through forced, intentional, continual meditation, those are counterfeits of, in the Bible, God says, seek ye first the kingdom of heaven, and all things will be added unto you. And so when you develop a relationship with God through Jesus Christ, and I'm not talking about religion whatsoever. I think religion's one of the most dangerous things on the earth right now. And I'm talking all of them. I won't get near a brick and a mortar building anymore. The last time I went to a church, I had witches there pretending like they were doing deliverance on me, who were actually doing witchcraft on me, and are Satanists. And I was given a vision and shown they were actually serpents, of a serpent bloodline. And so when I wake up in the morning, I'll have a dream, and then I'll have visions while I'm writing. I'll see things. I'll start to doze off and I'll see. And a lot of people, like I said, would call that like a lucid dream, or people can start using that for divination. If it's active, then they can go and start trying to use that to give other people information about their own life. Like occasionally I'll be told to share some of that stuff, but that stuff's for me. I think everybody's supposed to have their own spiritual gifts activated for their own self, not to go out and be some prophet in everybody else's life. Like, you have that capability and ability. Why don't you activate your own gifts? And so when it comes to these spiritual gifts, I'm not saying like that was what I wanted. That was what I was after, was the spiritual gifts. But where I got messed up was I hadn't sought that protection and covering by God. And if you're not careful, you end up in the wrong kingdom and with the counterfeit, and then it's a slippery slope from there. And I played in both unknowingly. There's a lot of grace for when you're figuring things out, especially if you're anointed. People who are living by natural law and not doing harm to other people, that's the thing that gets really tricky with divination and witchcraft and sorcery and all of that stuff, is why it's dangerous, is because it affects the will of other people. God's law is will. God won't even insert his will into our will. He allows us to choose. So what are you doing doing witchcraft and divination, inserting your will into somebody else's life? And that stuff pisses me off, because my whole life was handled by messing with my will. My will was held and stolen from me my whole life, and I didn't know it until I got it back. And then it was like, oh, but then my will's also no longer my will, because I don't know what to do with my will. I have to be led and directed by God. And that keeps me really safe. And I feel really safe in that space now, because there was a season where it kind of, I had to shift over to that, because I thought I was trying to get my will back. I wasn't. It says, do the will of the Father. And he created me. And so he knows what I was created for. So once I started doing his will, then it feels really good. Then it's like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And then things are flowing in a different way. When I was flowing in New Age, I'm flowing in blinded, occultic, hidden, like there's blind witches. In a way, I was like being a blind witch, not knowing I wasn't trying to be a witch, but there was little things I was doing. I wasn't trying to harm anybody else. I never intentionally tried to do harm, but I tried to bend God's will. I tried to bend other people's will for what I wanted, but that's backwards. That's counterfeit. And so it really comes down to what is the intention behind it, and what are you doing with this gift and ability, and who is the spirit behind it? Do you even know who's talking to you when you hear that? Because I've gotten to the point now where when I hear or see or feel, I'll hear a voice, and if it's a witch talking to me or if it's a demon, I can tell now, because I can hear clear enough that their voice sounds different. Where before it was subtle and quiet while I was developing, and so I had to try to figure it out and feel into it, because I'm a deep feeler. So for a long time, my gifts were pretty blind and I couldn't really see or hear. I was learning discernment through feeling. And God told me at one point, when I was kind of frustrated about it, when I was seeking spiritual gifts, he told me very clearly, he said, to see is to be blind. To feel is to see. So that was really powerful for me, because I learned that vision that everybody wants, especially with psychedelics like plant medicine and stuff, like everybody's always trying to take enough DMT to like get the vision or see the colors and everything. And it's like, for what? You go get a kaleidoscope and look in it. That's about as much as that's going to serve you, to see all that. Because at the end of the day, like your purpose and what you're called here for, there are children being sodomized every day out there. There are people being murdered and their organs being eaten, and all this horrific stuff going on. And we're trying to ascend through DMT so I can like leave my body for a minute and like feel really like that's not what life's about. That's a counterfeit of going into another dimension, right, where you don't know who's there.
Well, and I would say a lot of those people are ignorant and misguided and seeking escape from this world that has been run amok by people who are irresponsible with their God-given duties and embrace Satan instead. I mean, I'm really blown away on how much this is meshing with things that I've found through my experience. And, I'm not an advocate of psychedelics as much as I used to be. But I will say that the few times I've done psychedelics, believe it or not, it's pushed me closer to believing in a creator and God.
Yeah.
And I never, as a teenager, I certainly wanted to, go and smoke a joint and see Bugs Bunny and have this kind of cartoon experience that we get from the movies.
Yeah.
But I quickly realized that had nothing to do with any of it. And, especially through this podcast, I've learned to become very wary of things like DMT, which I've never partaken in. And it's kind of interesting because there is a sector of this podcast community that's all for it and encourage, oh, you got to try it. You got to try it. Oh, do it. And then do a podcast about it. And I started to think to myself, like, are they really aware that they're encouraging me to do this, or is this something operating through them? And that's when I started to really get freaked out about it, because it did seem like, these people were not real. They were just like bots saying, go do DMT, do DMT. And I'm like, what? Why? I mentioned it once on a podcast and now I have 6 YouTube comments telling me to do that. It's a little weird.
That's interesting that you say that, because there are a lot of like NPC bots like playing out in that field, and that is those spirits that are working in them. And that path, it really leads to, it's always pushed like, oh, it makes you such a great creator. And there are a few people who do become really great creators through those sources, but for the most part, a lot of people just end up losing themselves and become really confused, is what I saw. And the other thing is that, it's not, I like everything that you said. And it can be a tool, and it's a stepping stone for some people. And like I said, it always comes down to your intentions. There's grace. There's a ladder that we're climbing. There's lessons that are learned along the way. There's purposes for things. I got to a point where, luckily, I lived in a legal state in California where when I left Mormonism, I could use cannabis legally and have experiences with that. And I was actually very led, even as a Christian, by God to use that for a while. And then when he started telling me to stop using it and put it down, that was when I started having problems, because it was like, it wasn't for me anymore, because I was created by God, and I started making it an idol. And I wasn't doing other things with my time that I should have been doing. I wasn't using more powerful spiritual gifts to go into my thought processes, because I was really deep. It was always like sativa. I want to be in my head and be thinking and learning and understanding and like channeling and downloading. It was very cerebral for me. And it was like, no, I needed to go back to like this relationship with God and understand the feeling of love. And Mary Jane does become an idol, and she's a spirit. And in the Bible, what it calls it is, it calls them the elemental spirits, or the rudiments. And I didn't know it was in the Bible for a long time. And when God told me to stop, and I didn't for a while, I had some learning experiences that were negative. And so that's kind of what he does with people. Like, I know a lot of people who did a ton of psychedelics for years, and then they met Satan face to face in that realm. And then I was like, oh, hell no, I'm not ever going back to that. Or like, then it was like, okay, let me work really hard to get back and figure out why I had that experience. And then they work through, and then they just stick in that. And it's like, well, now he's got you. That that's where he was and that he lived. Like LSD, the people who created it, LSD stands for Lucifer, Satan, devil. That's the enemies, and then there are these plants. But what it says in the Bible is that it says, when you are reborn in Christ, taste not, touch not. There's a few different verses in there that talk about these rudiments and these elemental spirits. And so when you get to a level of being able to understand that, like, okay, everything works better if I do this in partnership with Jesus Christ, and if I allow him to talk to me instead of these fallen angels and these Mary Jane spirits and all these other little rascally spirits that are talking to me. Because I believe that we are all meant to hear, see, feel in the spirit. We are spiritual beings first, eternally. Like, this physical life is nothing compared to the eternal spiritual. And so I do believe we're supposed to have all of these things. And a lot of people do have those experiences. And if God created you to have those experiences for a season, then some people have some really great anointed experiences with that, as I did for a season. But then when he tells you to put it down and leave it alone, if you don't, you're going to be in trouble. And then legal right starts changing, and then the enemy gets legal right. And what I've heard some Christians who've gone into a lot of psychedelics, and it talks about this in the Bible, is that at some point it becomes that you're eating from the enemy's table. That's his food. And those elemental spirits that are communicating with you become idols. And then instead of listening to Creator, Holy Spirit, then you're dealing with this. For somebody like me who was coming out of mind control programming, witchcraft, it was like God wanted me to use some cannabis for a while, because it really is a really great deprogrammer. But Jesus is a way better deprogrammer than that is. But I didn't know how to access him, because I was so mad at Mormonism and religion, finding out that it's bunk, wiggity whack, BS, that I had to leave that all behind and go over here and learn some other things. And he'll use that for my good. And he uses that for my testimony to share with other people. And I gained a lot of knowledge and wisdom through that. But at this point in my path, it's the forbidden fruit. And I can't touch that anymore. And if I do, immediately I have repercussions, and God lets me know, no, you're done with that. You're moving away from that. And so it's kind of like, because I heard you on one of your podcasts talking with somebody about, I think it was the guy you mentioned his name earlier. It just slipped my mind. He was on Joe Rogan. You've done like 28 shows or something with him.
Sam Tripoli?
Yeah. He was talking about how, like, why they're growing so much weed in masses now. Why it's being taken over by this different industry than just like, you can't just find a regular old Joe Schmo, Mexican grower who you can just get some, normal, non-hybrid, non-messed with weed from on the streets. You can't find that hardly anymore. It's like, if you don't go there, they turned it into science. They know everything that's in it. They've mixed it with a bunch of other plants. And not only that, they're putting occultic Illuminati symbolism on all of the packaging. And now, because there's a spirit behind these plants, then they can curse it and use witchcraft with it. And it's the new pharmaceutical. That's what's going on with plant medicines, because they're realizing people are waking up too fast. People are getting away from being addicted to pills. In Mormonism, everybody's addicted to pills. There's Xanax, their Lortabs. And it's like, that's not cool anymore. If you're not, doing the plant thing, and that became so forward. And now that it's becoming legal, now the Satanic Kingdom is less interested in pushing their pharmaceuticals and their street drugs. Now they have to get behind the plant medicine. And now they're going to manipulate that. That's why they're spraying stuff on it. That's why they're doing witchcraft over it. That's why they have to put it all in a little package and sell it to you under a spell. And the first time I ever used some from a pharmakia legal shop that I didn't buy off the street, it started messing with my head.
Right.
That's not the same stuff. It gets really different. So it's getting really messy within the plant medicines. And a lot of the people that I met within the plant medicine community are sorcerers and witches. And those are the people that go into the jungle that train to carry these medicines so that they can call in their spirits from the other kingdom to control your healing experience. That's what you thought you were going in for.
Yeah. Yeah. Although I didn't have that perspective on it, I had the same experience where, and in 2016, I drove out to Colorado and everything was actually really great there. But I think that was maybe the first instance of legal weed, and they hadn't quite gotten in their hooks in yet. But when I tried what they're selling out here in Massachusetts and Connecticut, it was like a totally different experience. Obviously, it costs twice as much, but I never buy from those outlets because it's just not well grown. And I wonder if I was chalking it up to, them being amateurs when really it's being messed with purposefully.
It's intentional. Yeah, absolutely. Because pharmakia is sorcery witchcraft. And so within the pharmaceutical community, that's why they legalized it, because they're like, people are getting their hands on this. People are waking up out of their mind control programming. People are coming out from under the satanic system and waking up and leaving in droves, and they're using these plant medicines. So we've got to get a hold of that and contain the plant medicine industry with our witchcraft and turn that into the new pharmakia. And so that's why you have all these shops popping up all over the country that are now, it's like, you might as well just go back to your Lortab, I mean, not really. It's still going to be better, but maybe not. I don't know. It's spiritual. Everything is spiritual.
Well, I do think that God sent this message to me in a few different ways, because I just found something yesterday that talked about the history of marijuana use in Egypt and how it caused a lot of problems for them, and they've had cannabis for hundreds and hundreds of years. So they've seen what this can do in generations. And they talk about, of course, this was hundreds of years ago. Things were different, but they talked about the population of men being in a mass stupor, and how Napoleon came through and he was like, why are all your young men sleeping. It's daytime. What's going on? You know, and he banned it in France because he's like, we're not going to have our men like this. What is going on?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think people are being very naive, and I'm very worried about things like concentrates because it's such a massive load of THC at once. I mean, I remember the first time it came around, and my friends, you know, they were like, "Oh, try it, try it." I fell right asleep. I'm like, "Well, what fun is that?" I'm hanging out. I'm here to hang out with my friends and get to know you guys, and then you give me something that makes me fall asleep for 2 hours. Like, I might as well just stay at home, you know?
You know, and you're exactly right about that, because those vape pens that they have now that make it so easy, you can be out at a restaurant, people are getting high, you know, right in the middle of, you can't smell it. It doesn't hardly have a smell. And the chemicals that they use in those, like the few times that I did try those, I never went back, because they make you cough so bad. And I could even tell, like, it's not a real high. It's like a chemical in your brain, and there's a flatness to it that you're not even really getting the full. Because I was a sativa girl, you could the cerebral aspect of it, it was flat, and I just felt like this dull something happening in my head, and I knew it was the chemical. And then the coughing that came along with it was horrific. And then on top of that, you know, they love to push that because now they can get all the kids doing it way younger, way earlier, which I used to think it was no big deal. Like the young kids, it was fine. They lie. It doesn't really mess with the brain. But I've seen enough teenagers now who I know who use it, who are close to me, and I know it does. I've seen how it puts kids into a daze. It does make them lazy. It does steal their, you know, drive and ability, which, if you're in school, that's another thing, because I don't like what schools are like. I would pull all my kids out of school tomorrow if I could. I don't agree with public school and what's going on there. But it makes, even if it's not sativa, the way it makes the eyes small. That was another thing, is I would always understand that when my eyes got small, I would go inside of myself. And so I also wasn't present. You know, you're not fully present. And so there's a lot of things that you miss. And then a lot of things that you could be doing with your life, you're not doing because you're in your head. That was kind of my experience. Is I felt like I was doing so much, but it was in a spirit realm, and I'm a physical being for a reason. I'm supposed to be here living a physical life and having a physical experience, you know, and I was getting lost in this space. Now, I wouldn't say, like, I used to be the same as you. I actually tried to get a job at a dispensary. You know, going into shamanism, it was something that I wanted to advocate for. And I've changed a lot since then. And I wouldn't say I have, like, problem with it. Is like, there's a time and season for it, is what I believe. But I think the danger is that so many people get to that place where it's just like, it's great, it's legal now, there's nothing wrong with it, it's not addictive. Sorry, it's addictive. It's spiritually addictive. I was completely spiritually addicted to that meditation that I would go into, and that dance with Mary that I would have. But I needed to find that with Jesus, and I have a much more beautiful dance with Jesus now that's clean and clear, and I have a lot more going for me in my life. And I did ruin my teeth. I had to start taking diatomaceous earth. Luckily, God put me on to diatomaceous earth. I had my gums growing back, and all of my receding gums, and my sensitivity in my teeth, and they were thinning out because I smoked so much for a few years that, you know, I'm kind of obsessed with teeth health and my mouth health. And so taking diatomaceous earth every week, every day, really restored that for me. And then there was, I did have a lot of coughing and lung issues, which for a long time I didn't think I did, but I started getting, when he told me to quit, there was a point when he would tell me to quit. And if I would inhale and actually go and smoke, it would cut off my nose. I couldn't breathe through my nose. I would literally stop being able to breathe through my nose. And that's how I would always know. He's trying to tell me I got to put it down, you know. And I had to revisit a few times, but I was definitely spiritually addicted to that experience. And so, you know, if somebody's incredibly depressed, going through, you know, spiritual, religious issues, health issues, that they don't have the knowledge and wisdom to know how to heal themselves or use any other alternative healing. Like, there's a place and a time for it, you know, but there's also a place and a time where if you're on a spiritual path of ascension, you will have to leave it behind, because you can't keep ascending with these tools in your pocket. You know, there's other tools that are much higher and more powerful that we need to be given. And we're moving into a season of where things are going to get really ugly in this world, you know, and you're not going to want to use that anymore when the demons start walking the streets and the Nephilim come up from underground and the giants are here and the shapeshifters are shapeshifting right in front of our places. You don't want to go into that dimension with them because those psychedelics take you there, and you're going to want to be with God, and you're going to want protection and power away from that. And so it can be a slippery slope, you know.
Wow, I'm so glad that I have you here on the show right now. You're hitting so many points for me, and the dental health thing is definitely a sore spot for me as well. You mentioned dentistry before and how the Mormons use dentistry to manipulate, and that rung a huge bell in my head because I've had some bad experiences with the dentist. You know, a bunch of my teeth in the back are missing, so I'm going to have to buy some of this diatomaceous earth. That's diatomaceous for people who are listening and maybe have the same issue. Is there a recommended brand or outlet to buy this? Because I'm seeing a lot of it that looks like it's more of a planting, like a gardening tool.
You have to look up and make sure it's food grade. So type in food grade when you look for it. And I've gotten it at Home Depot, Lowe's, or I just order it on Amazon.
Right.
But you want to start with, because it's really drying, you know, it's like chalk and it doesn't taste like anything. And I started taking it with juice because I didn't want to stand the taste of it, but then I gained a bunch of weight. And because I was having juice every day, and like just having that little bit of sugar in my diet every day, those carbs killed me. So now I just take it with a little bit of stevia and lemon in water. You can just take it with water if you can palate it, but you know, I like to give it to my kids and they need something to be able to get it down. But you start with 1 teaspoon for a few days, chug a bunch of water after. It'll probably make you pee a lot. It also, you know, I actually felt a little bit of that feeling when you first smoke some weed in my head, like this head sensation. And I honestly think what it is it pulls out heavy metals. It's detoxing, and it has this like magnetism type effect. So you'll kind of feel some movement in your body when you take it. I like the way it makes me feel, and it's just really subtle, and it's just for the first little while. But like a teaspoon for a few days, then 2 teaspoons for a few days, to up to where you can get to a tablespoon. A tablespoon has 3 teaspoons in it. Heaping tablespoon. I just mix it in a little jar with just like only a little bit of water, shake it up, and then down it with a whole bunch of water. Within 2 weeks, I've seen like translucent edges of my teeth completely fill in. My gums, I noticed they had come down pretty quickly. My gums that were receding and exposing roots and stuff like that, they even grew back down. I also started brushing my teeth with salt. This was stuff that was given to me, but God started giving me visions actually and telling me how to take care of this stuff. I took all of the soaps and shampoos out of my routine that have hormone disruptors in them, which is in about anything you can buy at the store. So I wash my body with salt now. I wash my hair with clay, and I rinse my hair with a what's it called? Apple cider vinegar rinse. I just do like this much apple cider vinegar in a kombucha bottle, and then I fill the rest with water and put that on my hair, and it changes the pH, and then I can get a brush through it and brush my teeth with salt. And then sometimes I'll use a little bit of all natural neem mouthwash if I'm going somewhere or seeing somebody. But for the most part, like, I can't believe how my breath doesn't even smell anymore. I used to be chewing gum all the time, you know? And so I really refined everything that I was putting into my body that way. And over a few months period, when I got away from all that stuff and I really started, that's the thing that's great, is when you get away from those crutches like cannabis and stuff like that, your gifts blow out of the water when you dedicate them to God and you don't use the counterfeit anymore. And so like I knew, because every time I would go back to it, I would stop dreaming. And so when I would quit, then I would have more dreams, and then my visions always would follow my dreams, and then I would have more of where I could see. Because a dream and a vision's different. A dream's like more the playing a long scene through the night. Not necessarily through the night. It's usually right before you wake up. But, and then my visions and all that stuff started coming back, you know, and toothpaste, and the fluoride in toothpaste is meant to make it so that you can't have visions. That fluoride really shuts your pineal gland down.
Yeah.
So Salt's really powerful in the mouth, and it's not too abrasive. It dissolves immediately. I wash my face with salt. I wash my body with salt. It's really good on my skin. I used to shower once or twice a day, and I only shower every 2 or 3 or 4 days now, just depending on how I feel. I never get BO anymore. Like, when you get rid of all that stuff, it just is amazing what happens to your body. But yeah, your mouth, they lie to you. I was starting to get cavities and stuff too, and I didn't want to go to the dentist because a lot of the dentists are sorcerers. And the thing is if you think about it, the sodomy rituals that happen through a sexual entrance into the body, your body's also a sexual organ. Or I'm sorry, your mouth. Your mouth is also a sexual organ. And so the sorcery that can take place when a dentist puts his hands in your mouth, a lot of them are MK Ultra Monarch programmers. And I know this because I know a few of them in my family, in my family's bloodline, who I've had visions about and had experiences with them, and just totally started. I was praying about this for a long time. Like, what is it with these dentists and because I'd heard a lot of people talk about it, but nobody could really tell me what was going on. And this was all just kind of started making sense and revealed to me. So some of them like have rooms in the back. Like, they give you a little laughing gas. You're in a weird state. You know, the wisdom teeth thing. I've started thinking like Mormons, I guess it's even bigger in Utah and with Mormonism than it is in a lot of other places. There's something I still don't have all the answers on yet about getting the wisdom teeth taken out, but I almost think it's a ritual or something that happens because they put you completely out when that's happened, and it's really weird. There's a lot of demonic stuff that happens with kids after they come out from under that weird spell. And so yeah, I know that dentistry is a huge part of this satanic MK Ultra system.
Right.
You got to be careful.
Well, and it almost feels like there are no questions. There's no leeway. It's no, you need to get this done. Don't ask questions. Don't try to understand it. This is just what's best for you. That's always felt utterly satanic to me. And yeah, I have some investigating to do because there's a dentist that I went to when I was a kid, and it's just something about him makes me feel really, really strange. And I ran into him when I was working at a farmer's market in a very wealthy town. And when I realized he lived in that town and not the town I'm from, it really made me hate him, which I don't hate any person. Like, I don't, yeah. But it gave me this sense of like, this guy's deceitful, you know?
Yeah.
And
yeah, you were definitely discerning something there.
Yeah, it's really, really sinister, you know, and you know, a lot of people might look at this whole conversation and just say, oh, well, this is too much for me. But when you look at the overwhelming number of people who have the same experience of, I escaped Mormonism, or I had to leave this, my family was a cult, these people were abusing me and in a systematic way, it's just, it breaks the heart. And I'm so happy in your case that you're so strong and resilient and not only got over and past this, but now you're speaking against it and uplifting me in a huge way, because this dental health situation is a big problem in my life. And I think there was a higher order that arranged our conversation today for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm glad that we could cover some of this stuff and that you could learn some things, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to share my story. I mean, it was a you know, there's so much more to it. If people are interested in really the whole thing, you can go and watch. I have a few other I have a channel called Kadosh Life on YouTube and Rumble. And, you know, if people want to hear all of the details of what it was really like, but all the things I went through with the government being involved, the losing custody of my kids, you know, the corrupt judges, discovering all of the attorneys are actually Freemasons. All the judges are Freemasons. They're all in part of this cult, you know, and it makes sense if you think about it. The beast system, they have to place all of their own at they're all gatekeepers. They have to make sure that if anybody is going to try to get somebody in trouble, report one of their own, report a pedophile, report one of their brother men, you know, like they have to have gatekeepers every place along the way. And of course, you have a few good men in there here and there. But for the most part, what I learned through my whole experience is that the entire system's infiltrated, from the hospitals, from the psych ward, from the cops, to the judges, to your own attorney, and I dealt with all of that within trying to get out and escape. And they were all part of, able to be infiltrated and controlled to try to keep me from getting where I needed to get in order to be set free, get my children back. And at the end of the day, like, God's ways are higher than their ways, and he's more powerful than any man on the earth. And he helped me get my kids back, set me free from these systems outside of court. The court wasn't going to do anything for me. That judge hated me. I got custody of my kids back. I'm, they even followed me into my work. I started working after 14 years of being a stay-at-home mom, and I had witches show up at my work. I had Freemasons show up and try to, I did. So I was an educator for Matrix, and I worked at a barber shop. That was the first job I got after I came back to California and was trying to reestablish myself to get custody of my kids back. And my ex-husband had some people help me get that job. I found this out later. And, then they had a girl from like an hour away come. She's the one who took me to her church and was doing witchcraft on me, serpent seed. And they infiltrated my work, infiltrated my job. They were trying to set me up to get fired. They sent a guy in who sat in my chair and tried to throw a fit and act like I did a horrible haircut after he was in my chair for 3 minutes, which is funny because I was an educator for Matrix. And I'm a perfectionist, and I just know how to cut hair. I never messed up anybody's hair. Every client that ever sat in my chair said, "Oh, it's perfect. Give me your card." But they weren't putting me in the system, so people couldn't find me. And these, I started catching on. I actually was having dreams and visions about it, and God was just telling me straight up what they were doing to me at work. And when I started figuring out, one of my last days there, this guy came in, and it was so fake. He was the worst actor ever. And he started trying to act like I wasn't giving him his fade right, and that I should have been able to read his mind. And he wouldn't even, I'm also a really thorough communicator. And so my consultation is really important. So, okay, what number do you want? How high do you want your fade to start? Where level, and I'd ask him all these questions. He's like, "Well, you should just know." And then 3 seconds in, he jerks away and he rips the thing off and goes to walk out. And I was like, "Do you think I'm an idiot?" Like, that was the biggest fake. It was literally 3 minutes after he'd sat in my chair that this whole thing played out. So I had to quit my job, which by design, because they try to take you out of finances. If you don't have money, you can't do anything. If you don't have money, you can't have housing, you can't have kids, right? And so you can't get custody of the kids back. So that was always what they were trying to do. I had cops steal $50,000 out of my truck. I have it on video. They horrible actors. They're falling apart at the seams. Like, their work is falling apart, and they're all failing more and more every day. The civil war amongst the brotherhoods is about to play out because they all hate each other. They all serve, a master whose job is to steal, kill, and destroy, and they're not going to succeed. And I'm seeing that falling apart. But what I saw was at every level of the system and how infiltrated it was, all just because I was a woman who knew their secrets, and they didn't want me to talk, and they wanted to keep me controlled. And they're so misogynistic and so full of a desire to have complete power and control over other humans, which is what Satanism is, stealing the will, destinies, and stars of other humans. And so, God redeemed me out of all of that. It took some time. It was the hardest period of my life to go through. It was also the most rewarding because, anybody else out there who's listening, like, who's struggling, maybe going through. And the thing is that this isn't unique to Mormonism. This is Illuminati stuff. This is anybody who's in a bloodline family who tries to escape is going to go through a similar thing in a similar way.
Yeah, you mentioned the Catholic Church being a part of it, and although thankfully my family is, as far as I can tell, not a part of any greater grand Catholic family, I have seen some weird things just being a Catholic and knowing other Catholics, and there's definitely levels to it, and I wonder how associated like York Rite and the other forms of Freemasonry are to Mormonism, because there's a big Freemason presence here in my home state of Connecticut, and there's surprisingly a huge Mormon church right in the state capital that I had no clue about until I was delivering some packages out there as a delivery driver, my past job. And I was just kind of stunned to drive out of this sort of wooded area and into what seemed like a clearing, and there's this giant, massive Mormon church here. And so I don't want you to brush through your story too much, because I know you're kind of getting to some of the points that happen as you know, again, reign victorious, so to speak. And I'm so happy that you got your kids and you have custody of them. But I would like to have you back on for a part 2, and maybe we can go deeper into that, what you just sort of gave us a brief overview of, and get into some more details. And I really hope anybody listening, especially if you're from a Mormon community, maybe you were raised in some other version of the occult, you know, please feel free to get in contact with myself or Charissa. I hope that's okay for me to say on your behalf, because I think together we can all at least uplift each other and give each other the confidence to know, like, you're not in this alone, and you can find a way out. And Charissa, you really inspired me a ton today. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Good. Thank you. I get a lot of emails from people from all Mormonism and other branches of the Illuminati or even people who don't know for sure. They just resonate with the experiences that I had and start to realize I'm being handled, because when you're under MK Ultra or a magic spell over your mind, you can't see what's happening all around you. And that's why I know that my experience was divine and that I was given power to overcome so that I could help others. And I've written a book called, I can't even remember the name. It's kind of a long name. I just call it my warfare handbook. And it's a spiritual warfare handbook, but it's essentially, it's based on biblical principles, but it's essentially how to get out from under the beast system. It's how to get out from under the government. It's how to get out from under the lucid spells of the music industry, of the 7 mountains of culture, all of the 7 mountains of culture that all of us can't avoid all day, every day, media and all of that, the influence of all of those things that are owned by the beast system that keep us in some level of programming. It's renunciation of all of that. And those things, we're born under curses. They take our birthright when we're born. Our birth certificate is literally makes you a straw man. And now you're an empty vessel and they can fill you with whatever spirit they want and try. That's why we're all slaves to the system, work in the 9 to 5, all of that stuff. These things are all covenant curses just by being born, because Satan is deemed in the Bible as the god of this world. And so in order to get out from under that control, whether it's from generational curses of Freemasonry, of, like you said, York Rite, my family was Scottish Rite, which is, I believe, one of the highest powers in Freemasonry, one of the darkest. There's so many different types of brotherhoods, even down to, I've discovered some other ones that I had no idea that are brotherhoods that are more just like witchcraft and like orgy type cults, but those are the union brotherhoods, like the Electrical Workers Association. That's a brotherhood, and these people are part of this beast system. So there's so many different aspects in my book. It goes into the details. I was given a vision and shown all the different aspects of the Nephilim and how they've downsized and how they're hidden, and the different attributes that they have and how to recognize them through their physical features, because Mormons are huge inbred Nephilim hybrid seeds all over in Mormonism. So all of those are in my book. And then all of the renunciation prayers, my sovereignty prayer that I wrote that broke all of that off of me, is in there. And it's only like 80 something pages. There's a whole bunch of links at the end that I've had people call me and go, "Oh my God, I was born with a 6th finger. Like, I'm Nephilim hybrid. Am I evil, wicked?" And it's like, no, but you do have a curse on your bloodline, because like part of you is illegal. Like you're not, I shouldn't say you're not supposed to be here, but they weren't supposed to come down, and that 6th finger is a marker of that. And so there's generational curses on that bloodline that need to be broken. So all of that is in my handbook. So people can, reach out to me, and I it's free. I just email it to people. I haven't had time to publish it. It's just a a digital handbook. And so if people are interested in that, I can email you that. You can email me attorney@yah. Yeah, that's attorney, ATYAH @gmail.com. And I'll just email it over to you. And that's has a lot of good information in it. And my Instagram is attorney@yah. And my YouTube channel is Kadosh Life. And so, people can watch more of my story there, but we can definitely do a part 2. That'll be great.
Thank you. Yeah. And I would love to link all of that in the description. So folks listening, they can go directly over to your channel, send you an email if they'd like. And I would love to do a part 2 after I get a copy of that and look over it, maybe send it to Sam. I'm sure Sam would love to talk to you. You mentioned Sam before, but maybe this wasn't clear. I work for Sam as a booker, so I would love to schedule you to be on his show and talk about all of this. He's recently, I'll say, leaned further into Christianity, and he started reading the Bible, which I think is really, it's shown a difference in the way he talks about certain things. Like he seems a little more positive and less self-deprecating, which I like.
Yeah, that's amazing. I watched I think it's your most recent episode with him. Him talking about his kids and stuff, and Lee, I don't know that he left comedy, but just talking about kind of the transition over to some different stuff, and fascinating. He's very interesting, and I love his story of kind of that rebirth, and I'd love to talk to him. He's an interesting person, and I just love seeing those. I've been through so many different rebirths in my life, and you grow, and you're always a new creation and going through these different lessons and phases of life. And it's so fascinating. I love seeing people, go through that growth. So, yeah,
I'm on my own path as well. I think, the Catholic Church sort of dispelled me. Like I was there and I didn't understand what was going on. I saw bloody Jesus up in the, almost like they were trying to carry out the sacrifice as long as possible and just like rub it in our face. And I just always felt like it was dramatic and like, I wasn't learning anything from it. And unfortunately that pushed me into atheism, and then cannabis kind of brought me into this realization that no, God is actually here. You've never not known God. He's always been here. And that to me was sort of like a big change in my own life 10, 12 years ago. And here I am now still sort of integrating that message. So I'm going slowly. That's awesome. But Charissa, I do feel like a lot of this was, for lack of a better word, meant to be, right? Especially, and not that before what you were saying wasn't clicking, but when you told me about the dental health thing, it was like, whoa, how does she know that I have this problem? Like we didn't talk about this at all. And it's just, I feel like God does that, he's little winks here and there.
And I haven't talked about it in any of my other interviews. And so that's definitely, I feel he just is so good that way. And that's why I love the change that I've come to, because that's what he does with me, is he just puts these things on my heart to say, and I have no idea. And it really blesses people. And it's like really nothing. He's the one that told me about it and led me to it. And then it helps other people. And I don't take any credit for it, but I love how he works like that. Right. And, I love seeing people just grow into these realizations, and there's so much power in these different levels of ascension, and it's so exciting to see people go through it. But and it's interesting too, because you were actually the first person who asked me to be on your show after everything happened. I don't know, you said one of your maybe it was the second then, because you said somebody who listens to your show told you about me, so they must have heard about me from somewhere else, unless they saw they might have seen your Instagram
channel, because I think they linked your Instagram to me.
Okay.
So they must have seen your videos.
I think you were the first. I think it was you and Emma had messaged me, and it has been several months, and then all of a sudden you came back and said, "Oh, I never saw your email," because I did email you back, and I was looking forward to talking with you months and months ago. It might have even been almost a year ago. I can't remember how long it's been, but so he does that too. Like timing always is a thing, so it happened when it was supposed to.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks for reminding me of that because you're absolutely right. And something in me a couple of weeks ago was like, you definitely invited people onto your podcast that you never like. I do that where my memory just slips, and there's people who I'm supposed to talk to, and so I'm glad. Yeah, this was certainly meant to be, and yeah, Charissa, this is awesome. Thank you so much for
Yeah,
spending the
thanks, Mark.
time. And my audience, I always tell them to immerse themselves in the moment wherever they are in the now. But today, I think I'm going to change it up and I'm going to say, go and check out Charissa's work because it struck me so brilliantly. And I think it will for you too. So do that and be blessed.
Thanks.